Prog Watch. Music that tells a story with your friend and host, Big Tony Rousick, a.k.a. Prog Squatch.
Hey sports fans, it's time to discover a new way to bet with Bet.
Hello to all my friends out there in Progland, and welcome back to Prog Watch. This is your old pal Big Tony, and before I begin, I'd like to take a moment to say a quick thank you to all of my supporters on Patreon.com who help to keep the show going. If you enjoy the show and it has some value to you, I'd ask you to consider becoming a patron of the Progressive Arts. You can find more info about supporting Prog Watch at patreon.com/Anthony Rousick. There's also a support the show link at the top of the homepage at progwatch.com, PROGWATCH, all one word.com, which will take you to the same place. I opened the show today with Clap, a solo guitar piece by Steve Howe, which was included on the Yes album back in 1971. I figure you can't really do an artist interview and feature program on Steve Howe without playing that one, and that's exactly what I'm doing this week. An interview and feature program on the one and only Steve Howe, with whom I was lucky enough to speak a few weeks back. Before we get into any of that interview, let's do another favorite Yes track of mine, which really showcases Steve and You and I from Close to the Edge.
The shapes of the morning, and you and I reach over the sun for the river, and you and I glide clearer towards the movement.
Again, that was And You and I, classic Yes music from my particular favorite Yes album, Close to the Edge, released back in 1972. So now let's listen to a bit of my interview with Steve Howe. Before I begin, though, you may notice that I sound a bit frazzled in the early part of the interview. You know, like I was not my usual laid-back, prog-loving self. Of course, the fact that I was talking to Steve Howe can account for some of that, but a lot of my anxiety came from the circumstances surrounding the interview. Everything was all set for the morning of one of my days off, so all was good there. I woke up an hour and a half before the interview, so I would have plenty of time to fire up the old studio computer and test my recording setup. After I got up and got the computer going, I noticed there was an email from Steve's publicity people concerning a change of phone number where I was to reach Steve. Now I was calling some kind of UK toll-free number and was supposed to enter a certain code number to make the final connection. I had never done that before and decided I'd better conduct a test, and it was a good thing I did. I was not able to enter the code after connecting through my Skype rig. So with less than an hour before interview time, I was experimenting with attempting to wire my wife's cell phone into my recording setup, which was not working out. With about 20 minutes to interview time, I decided to scrap that entire idea and go old school. I got out my handheld digital recorder and would simply put Steve on speaker on the cell phone and record the proceedings on the handheld, which worked. But of course you will hear that people were calling my landline in the middle of the first interview segment, and you may hear me attempting to deal with that while still carrying on with Steve, and you will probably hear some stress in my normally smooth, deep, and dulcet voice. Maybe not my best work, but I managed to pull it off. So here we go with part one of the interview. So anyway,
you're out of bed, are you now?
yeah, we are. We're all good. It's rolling. So let's get going here.
Okay, good.
How did you get started in music? Did you come from a musical family?
Not particularly, no. I mean, my dad liked music, but nobody really played anything directly in our family. So it was just by the time it was about 1957, I was starting to notice that popular music was rising and the Shadows were coming out and everything. And I got into popular music and country music and even Les Paul before I even picked up a guitar. I'd heard a lot of his music. So by the time I was 12, I was very keen to learn the guitar, and a couple of years later I was in a band, so it's never really stopped since then.
Okay, so you mentioned Les Paul. I think you have one of the most distinctive sounds in the history of rock music. I always know when I hear you playing. Who beside Les Paul would you say was an influence?
Well, I mean, the whole slew of the top flight guitarists, been feeding me, ideas for years. But it's really Chet Atkins. After a couple of years of playing, I discovered Chet Atkins, and I just felt he was the all-round best sort of player, and I liked his different styles that he worked in. And of course, he had a lot of country influence, but his improvising and his control over playing tunes was really phenomenal. And I love Chet, the most. So it was really Chet Atkins has been my most constant inspiration.
So Close to the Edge is definitely one of my favorite Yes albums. What would you say were your favorites? You've been in and out of the band for like 50 years, so do you have any particular favorites?
I don't really have favorites. I mean, I've got to admit that, if I had to pick one, it might be Close to the Edge because, it's a very kind of synonymous album. It's very rich in the way that it, challenges musical styles and, gets weird and, church organs flying around and all sorts of things. So, yeah, it's a very colourful album, and I like the acoustic approach of And You and I very much, and my tentative introduction to steel guitar recording started something that is going on still today. So, yeah, it carries a lot of the trademark symbols, and I was still searching for, I already had a great guitar, the 175, but I was still searching and experimenting with different sorts of guitars, which I did throughout the 70s. But it was, that was a good exploration record, and, we're very proud to be thought of, as bringing the 20-minute piece into being, and it's one of our own sort of styles of music, like, Gates of Delirium and Topographic Oceans, and big pieces just seem to make the band rise to the occasion.
Right. So how about, you have any favorite Asia albums? You've also been associated with them for many years.
Well, I'm not big on favorites, but obviously the first one is the outstanding record, because we went to every mix that Mike Stone did of the songs, and we visited him in the evening and said, that bass drum, or that keyboard or that guitar, we put our little pennies worth in, and I think that makes the first Asia record really rounded and grounded, if you like, with not only what Mike Stone envisages for us as a producer, but what we wanted too. And I think that collaboration is very important that's what Yes were all about. People had their fader and they pushed it up and down when they wanted it to be louder or quieter. So basically, that's a great record. But I mean, considering we made 3 in the reunion period, Triple X is got a lot of great things on it, and so I think we made up for messing around on the second record. So yeah, I mean, really, that first record is outstanding.
Okay, I know you bowed out of Asia a while back, but with you and Billy and Jeff working together in Yes, do you ever foresee working with Asia again?
I've not thought about it a whole lot. No, when John Lennon passed away, sadly, and Carl, Jeff, and I were left, that was a pretty hard, place to go. And basically, with Jeff in Yes, we'll kind of concentrate our energies more on there, and it lets Carl be a free agent doing his, ELP legacy and things like that. And basically, we had a good run when we reformed for 6 years. We were back together with me, and then they carried on a bit without me. But basically, that was a great period, and it sort of like sealed it all up.
Okay, is there any plans for any new Yes or Asia? Well, you just said Asia's out, but I mean, any plans for new Yes music?
Well, we're working on things, and we're going to make an announcement in a few weeks about what we plan to do. But at the moment, I can't say much more than that. We've been, sharing some songs and maybe building up, a residue of good music, because it's a very hard act to follow. So if we were going to do it, we'd like to be able to take some time and make it worthwhile. So stand by for more information on that.
All right, great. Before we break and move on to Steve Howe's solo career, let's check out a few Asia tracks which were co-written by Steve. From the first self-titled Asia album, I'm spinning One Step Closer, and from the final studio album to feature the original lineup, Triple X or 30 in Roman numerals, I'm playing Judas. Again, that was One Step Closer from the first eponymous Asia album back in 1982, which was followed by Judas from the XXX or 30 album released in 2012. After this break, we'll dig into some of Steve's solo career, and later still, I'll have more interview and a couple of new tracks from his brand new album called Love Is.
Throughout COVID-19...
In the mid-1970s, Yes was on hiatus, and the members of the band at that time all released studio albums in 1975 and 1976. Steve Howe began his solo career in earnest with the release of Beginnings in 1976. From that album, I'm playing a track called Ram, which I will follow with Diary of a Man Who Vanished from Steve's second solo album called The Steve Howe Album. Again, that was Ram from Steve Howe's first album, Beginnings, released in 1976, and Diary of a Man Who Vanished from the Steve Howe album in 1979. Let's move on with some more Steve Howe solo music from the album The Grand Scheme of Things. I'm playing the title track. I'll follow that with Distant Seas from his Natural Timber album. Again, that was The Grand Scheme of Things, title track from Steve Howe's album of the same name, released in 1993, and Distant Seas from his Natural Timber album, released in 2001. Carrying on with more great Steve Howe solo music, I've got Highly Strung from his Spectrum album, and a new version of his classic piece, Mood for a Day, which was released as part of his anthology package in 2015. What we just heard was a new arrangement of Mood for a Day, a piece Steve originally wrote for Yes's Fragile album, which was released in late 1971. This version came from Steve's anthology album, a 2-disc set released in 2015, and also features the English Chamber Orchestra. Before that, it was Highly Strung, a track from Steve's Spectrum album, released in 2005. After this short break, we'll hear the rest of my chat with prog rock legend Steve Howe, and hear a couple of tracks from his great new album, Love Is. Stay tuned.
The Vinyl.
Before we hear the rest of my interview with Mr. Steve Howe, let's hear a track from his new album, Love Is. This is Love Is a River. Once again, that was Love Is a River from Steve Howe's brand new solo album called Love Is. Now let's hear the rest of my chat with the man himself. So you have a new album coming out called Love Is. It's half instrumental and half vocal songs. You want to talk a little bit about the new album?
Sure. What do you want to ask me?
Where do you get your inspiration, after all these years, and what's your writing process like?
Well, that's two questions. Inspiration, I don't know. I mean, life is inspiring. That's all we've got to be inspired by. It's not a concept album per se, but obviously, back from 1967, we've had awareness about the value and the beauty of nature and the universe and other people. So basically, it'll carry some of those messages. It's a bit more of the story of my life, if you like, in song. I think all my writing is primarily autobiographical to some extent or another, or it's just what I'm thinking about at the time, how I can put that in a friendly, digestible sort of way, using melody as the first foot forward.
So you would come up with a melody first, basically, and then hang everything else on the melody, work the chords out around that?
No, I didn't mean that. I meant the melody's what I'm looking for. Melodicness is what I'm looking for. You don't always get that first, but structure's important, and many things go. It's not easy to explain how one makes music or puts it all together, arranges music from ideas, which is what I do. I arrange ideas into a track, into a form. So that's how I've always done it. Yeah.
Okay, so
did I answer your question? What was your question again? I couldn't make.
I guess it was about the writing process. Also, I understand some of the tracks were recorded at your home studio. Then you went to a larger commercial studio. Is that true?
Well, I record everything in my own studio, and then it's not a commercial studio exactly, it's a private studio, but where I go is where Pro Tools lives, and where a guy who really knows how to use it. So we can develop the music from my version of it. We can, record the drums with multiple mics, we can do things that I don't often or don't recently do so much here. So I get my guitars in a position, I get my bass, and I get things down here, but usually there's a lot more to do later where you need to split tracks or add things like John Davison on bass on the songs and his vocals, and then Dylan on the drums. So I mean, it's fairly streamlined setup, but obviously I do a lot of things, and those guitars take a lot of designing, and post-production as well, and realizing that I need something here where I haven't got something, or possibly I've got too much here, so let's take something out. So it's basically a bit like a juggling game with different musical instruments.
Okay. You mentioned Dylan, you mentioned John Davison. Are there any other noteworthy guests on your album?
No, just it was a streamlined, like it very often is with my solo albums. John Davison's a fabulous guest to have, and Dylan's been my most regular contributor to my solo work, so I'm flattered again to have his parts on there. But yeah, I didn't envisage anybody else really. Once I had John on board with the vocals and offered him the bass on the songs, it just seemed that I had a nice grouping.
So what's next? You mentioned the Yes announcement. Obviously, touring is kind of out the window right now. What's in the immediate future for you?
Well, in the long-term future, Yes have moved their European and British tour to next April, and so it's just a week earlier, but a year later than we were going to do it. And luckily, we got another date at the Albert Hall, so we've got those plans in mind. And, we're free agents, but as I said, when they make an announcement, you'll know what some of what we're doing is. And, that's the primal focus. The band, is looking for ways to stimulate existing and and hanging on for next year. So that's about all I can say. I mean, what's anybody doing at the moment is their own making, really. It's a question of finding, good vehicles to keep productive and keep moving ahead. So no doubt recording will come into it outside of Yes as well, So I've always got other recordings in progress. So, I can always revert to those if I find I've got time.
Okay, so I always love the picture. I think it's on your second solo album where you had all the guitars that you used in the making of the album, all the instruments, because there was mandolins and banjos and everything else there as well. Do you have a large collection of instruments? And if you do, how many different instruments do you think you own?
Well, as you said, on that album, I put some picks on. I do that occasionally. We just kind of list them occasionally out of interest. If people are, they can look into it. But yeah, I mean, I have a collection that's attempting to come down all the time as opposed to increase, because I was very fortunate to buy so many remarkable instruments, particularly in the 70s, and I've got far too many instruments. But I've got to lose them or move them on, sell them, exchange them, give them away, and do the right thing with them, because obviously I don't want to pass on something and then realise I needed it. So the guitars are always under observation, and I do things every year where I try and get the collection down, and occasionally something new comes along that I've got to have, particularly from Line 6, who make great guitars and effects and units and things. But yeah, I mean, I was very lucky. I've got a lot of guitars I always wanted in the 70s when they were available from the 60s and 50s. And that was one of the vintage periods of modern guitars, if you like, the 50s and 60s. So, yeah, I was very lucky. I got some wonderful guitars, and, I'm blessed to be able to select from them and have a few choices, and sometimes have two of something in case, if I'm using things on stage, sometimes I do need two of them, but I don't need two of everything, but two of anything that might be really a problem if it's not there. So, I love the collection, love being there. I can't really give you a number,
okay,
but it's a lot.
A lot. And under observation, I like that term. So, if you have sold guitars in the past, has the fact that you owned them added to their value, do you think? Were you able to get a higher price just because it was a played by Steve Howe guitar?
No, I do this much more discreetly now, and so, but that is a factor. I mean, nobody who's got a reputation necessarily sells at face value. So yeah, there is an added dimension to the fact that I have had it, and a lot of people have to pay a little more for a guitar that's been owned. You know, I mean, you know, you can think of some of the classic examples, you know, when that's so true, you know, that people have sold a guitar that maybe only worth 10,000, but they sell it for 100,000 because, you know, Dave Gilmour played it or Eric Clapton played it, you know. So there can be a big uppage, but I'm not really, you know, I like to think that the guitar that I had for a while is now being enjoyed as much as when I first bought it by somebody else. And so I don't make the sting in the tail too heavy. But there is a price you've got to pay, and you know, you want to come in on it, then you've got to accept that, yes.
All right. So I hope you enjoyed listening in on my chat with prog rock legend Steve Howe. It was a real thrill for me to get to speak with the man, and I thank him and his publicity people for the opportunity. I've got time for a few more tracks from Steve's brand new album, Love Is. So here's The Headlands and It Ain't Easy. The Headlands and It Ain't Easy, a couple of more tracks from Steve Howe's wonderful new album, Love Is. If you are interested, I will have links you can follow to find more about the new album and about Steve and his career in general when I post a show to my website, progwatch.com. At progwatch.com, you can also find my email and social media links, a link to my Patreon page if you would like to possibly support the show, and of course, every episode I have ever done with artist links to accompany all of those 300 plus episodes. If looking through 300 plus episodes seems a little overwhelming, remember that you can search the website from the top of the page. Just look for the little magnifying glass. So thanks for coming along for the ride. Until next time, be well and prog on, my brothers and sisters.
Street